My name is Martin Small. I'm the president of the Australasian College of Road Safety, and I'm the moderator of this webinar. The research community is a core part of the college's membership base. Australia is blessed with a rich history of institutions and leaders in this field, and this is a top of the line series of people speaking with you today. We'll have Q&A at the end of this session, but don't wait until the end. Please go on to the Q&A button to add in put in your questions as we go, and I'll do my best to moderate them at the end. We have one late scratching today due to illness. Dr. Jeremy Woolley won't be with us, and in his place will be the Deputy Director of the Centre for Automotive Safety Research in Adelaide, Dr. Matthew Baldock. I'd like to welcome all members of the Australasian College of Road Safety to this webinar, and welcome all our future members. To our future members, particularly, I'd suggest that you check out the acrs.org.au. You can email Molly Stanley at admin@acrs.org.au and arrange 3 months free membership of the college, so you can see something of what we're about. We support our members to eliminate serious road trauma through knowledge sharing, professional development, networking, and advocacy. So please get in touch if anything in this webinar is of interest to your possible membership of the college. It's worth saying very briefly that the college has developed a very concise policy platform for the upcoming Australian National Road Safety Strategy. We'd like to see the Minister's 2050 Vision Zero for fatalities extended to include serious injuries. We think that the 2030 targets for road safety in Australia should be aligned to those in the most recent United Nations resolution, and they should be set at 50% reduction targets to 2030. We want to see a publication of infrastructure safety star ratings in an easily consumable form across all road user groups, and a program to achieve those safety star rating targets in 2030. We'd like regulatory impact statements on lower default speed limits in rural and urban areas, and we'd like our vehicle safety regulation to be aligned with the EU through particularly intelligent speed assist and autonomous emergency braking. A big thing for the college is the ongoing nurturing of some of the ideas and understandings that you'll see today. It's essential that the new strategy is backed by further investment in crash investigation, data, and research. And so actually it's without further ado that I'd like to just go straight into these presentations. Professor Andry Rakotonirainy from CASR in Brisbane will speak to you about future mobility.
Thank you very much, Martin. I'm Professor Andry Rakotonirainy, Director of CASR. Today I will talk about future mobility, and I will make the point about the future will be digital. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yugera people of the land on which Queensland University Technology campuses stand, and I pay respect to the elders, laws, customs, and creation spirit. Now, we are witnessing a tsunami of new technology, including drones, automated car, 5G communication, Internet of Things. Each of those technology are generating a massive amount of data, and those data are also used to create new businesses models, such as ride sharing, the Lime scooters, for example, and there's an explosion of mobility as a service as well, or MaaS. Such a digitalization of the transport will not alone spontaneously improve road safety. And one of the reasons why it's not going to change it spontaneously is that human factors has to be taken into account. And if you look at what happened lately in terms of pandemic, which is very much related to human factor, is that not only pandemic was a big shock for all of us, but one of the shock wave generated by the pandemic is uncertainty. If you look at the graph that I put there, it's an index that shows the average of number of times the word pandemic was associated with the word uncertainty in the IMF, International Monetary Fund report. You will see that this pandemic, this COVID-19, has reached a very high score, and that shows really that the uncertainty is one thing that have changed our behavior, and that's generated distrust. This is distrust of our colleagues, because we think that the virus is lurking around. It creates uncertainty and distrust with the neighbors or with other people from the states. That's why some of the states are closed. If we look at the mobility pattern in Australia, and this is a graph generated by Google data, showing where people went in terms of residential place, parks, or going to pharmacy, retail and recreation, or workplace. You will see that in terms of going into transit stations, for example, during the COVID, it was really minus 60%. And if you look at the data on September the 4th, you will see that we are barely starting to reach normality, which is the 0%, which is the second line. You could see in this graph that the trip to residential places was increased during the pandemic. It's because of the working from home. Now, how is it related to traffic? We have this data from the Road Safety Bureau, Queensland Transport Road Safety Bureau, and it shows that during the pandemic, the traffic volume on a sample of state-controlled was decreased by 40%. Having said that, if we look at the fatalities in Queensland during that period, you would see in this graph, you have the baseline or the comparison in blue in 2019, and in red, the fatalities in this year during the pandemic. And you could see on the half part on your right that the number of fatalities actually increased. I should note that as of today, the fatalities in Queensland is 5 over the number of fatalities at the same period last year. Now, what happened in transport and in mobility in general, as I mentioned before, it becomes more and more digital. From the research point of view, we have those new technologies. Those technology created new methods to analyze data and to come up with also some interventions. There's lots of experimentation tools based on manipulating data, increasing modelization, more simulations, and as I said before, lots of data, and we are in the area of big data. There is an increasing pervasiveness of information from different devices, and the explosion of communication and automation makes it very difficult and provide also some context about understanding the transport landscape. What we've observed for the last 5 years is that the transport sector continues to be driven by technology. And fortunately, there is an increase in pressure to evaluate the impact of the technology, not only from the safety point of view, but also the health impact or the ethical implication of such a new technology. I would just make a quick point about the new technology or new software that has been hugely used recently, and this is the artificial intelligence, especially the machine learning and deep learning type of software. Given that we have lots of data, the transport community now is increasingly use artificial intelligence to analyze data collected from intelligent transport system. And it's really shaping the mobility ecosystem. Now, the question which is still not answered to this day is, how can we trust such an artificial intelligence system? Not only AI is used in driver's car, it is also used in any decision making to help policymaker, to help also vehicle manufacturer or any other road safety stakeholders. We don't know at this stage how we can trust such a system from the safety point of view, from the security, fairness, and privacy. And for our community in road safety, we don't know clearly how we can train such an artificial intelligence system about what is a safe behavior. This is an open question for researchers. But to be more concrete, as you know, the artificial intelligence is increasingly used in automated car, and it's often used as a black box, meaning that we don't know what's inside, we just use it as a black box. And the problem that we have, especially in an automated vehicle, is how can we trace the step that led to a decision, such a crash? It's very hard to trace back such steps with the use of artificial intelligence, not to mention that there is a big question about the ethics of such artificial intelligence system, and also there are some biases due to the data used to train those artificial intelligence systems. I guess one of the main messages that I want to point out with regard to the use of artificial intelligence is it's a new tool. At this stage, it's too difficult for the community or too difficult to use, and there are too little incentives to verify the claims of AI. There is no standard way or formal way to report the problem or to verify the claims that AI will provide. We are witnessing a new era of mobility, and we have the European especially have these properties as a claim for the new mobility system. It will have the pillar in terms of safety, sustainability, and equity. How such properties or such pillars will be implemented? It will be implemented with the use of automation, connectivity, decarbonization, and sharing. And of course, those four technology or those four principles will influence mobility demand and have an impact on user behavior. In Australia, what we need to take care of is that for the transport to be equitable, we need to take into account regions, rural, remote, and the minority, the indigenous community, for example. We know that an indigenous pedestrian male is 9 times more likely to die on the road due to a crash compared to a non-indigenous person. Also, one of the main push since COVID is the use of active transport, and for the active transport to be a democratic practice, and we all encourage to use of active transport, we need to develop another philosophy on how to share space, and especially for the future technology, how, for example, automated car will share the space with vulnerable road user. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Andry. That was a fantastic start to a picture of what it is that we've got to be tackling over the next period of time. I'm just going to go straight on now to Dr. Matthew Baldock from the Centre for Automotive Safety Research and the University of Adelaide.
Yes, Dr. Matthew Baldock here from CASR, speaking about closing the gap. So here I'm talking about closing the gap between where we are and where we need to get to. So, you know, there's been a lot of talk, obviously, about Vision Zero and pursuing a safe system. And I think in recent years, we're starting to see a real build in momentum, particularly among government authorities for pursuing a safe system, which is really good. And I think researchers are going to be very, very important for that, because it'll be researchers who will be instrumental in providing all of the data that will guide the processes for getting ultimately towards a safe system in Australia. So on that, it's been interesting during COVID that we've actually seen governments developing policies in very quick time in response to modelling and data analysis. So it can be done. There you go. So in the early phases of COVID, of course, there was lots of discussion of modelling of infection rates and ICU capacity, etc., and how this is going to be managed and flattening the curve. And increasingly, we're seeing, you know, real-time analysis of ongoing data in terms of infections and deaths, and therefore the government response to that. So we've seen the landscape probably change in some way towards the centrality of the use of data to guide government policy. And of course, this is occurring at a time when many jurisdictions are in the process of developing their road safety strategies, including the federal government, of course. Now, recently, the Office of Road Safety put out some discussion papers, early discussion papers, about sort of key areas that needed to be addressed. And a lot of it was couched in terms of fatalities. Now, we've done a fair bit of work at CASR looking at fatal crashes compared to serious injury crashes, both in terms of the road user behaviour that goes into it, but also in terms of compliance with the safe system and how it differs between those sets of crashes. And I think if you sort of base your strategy on fatal crashes, you're going to end up with some policies that aren't really going to work for the broader road safety problem. And that really underscores the importance of supplementing fatal data with really good serious injury data. And of course, the Office of Road Safety are very well aware of the need for this and are very keen to pursue it. So it sort of demonstrates the need for all jurisdictions to get better, I think, at coordinating a consistent approach to defining and measuring serious injuries and recording them and reporting them. Yeah, and also in addition to injuries, we particularly have to look at ways of investigating road crashes. So there are different levels of investigation of road crashes in terms of detail and number. So at the top there, you can see sort of police reported crash data sets, which is, the complete population of road crashes that meet a certain level of severity, but fairly slim detail in regards to each individual crash, because of course there are so many, and you just sort of need a certain level of data to get you the information you need for the whole population. But then that sort of goes through from there up into very, very detailed forms of crash investigation. So for example, the in-depth at-scene crash investigation that we do at CASR, and Monash, of course, has also done some of this, where you investigate the crash in a great deal of detail and in a great level of depth to try and identify how you can stop future crashes happening from that point forth, right up into the full ATSB investigations of major incidents. So really, we actually need good data collection at all levels. We need the police data, which gives us the complete picture, but in low levels of detail. But we also need the very detailed crash investigations of a smaller sample of crashes to give us a better idea about the sort of gaps in the system that we need to plug. Also, going forward, we're going to need to look at some new data sets, not just the crash and injury data. As part of pursuing a safe system, authorities are sort of looking at what the system has to be like in say 2050. What needs to be in place, and from there they can work back and say, okay, if that's what we need in 2050, what do we have to start doing now to bring that about? And then you can start setting targets along the way for transformation of the system to get there. But in order to look at progress towards that, in order to monitor that, you need new metrics other than just road crashes. So for example, how many highways are compliant with safe system principles? How many vehicles are fitted with technologies like electronic stability control or autonomous emergency braking? So we need these new sort of data sets, these new metrics going forward to monitor our progress towards a safe system. But also there's new technology coming in vehicles that can assist with looking at data to monitor progress and look at gaps in the system. And one example is the use of EDR. So whenever you're involved in a road crash, the airbag module in your vehicle will trigger the event data recorder, which is what EDR stands for, to record the last few seconds of data pertaining to the vehicle prior to the crash. So it records vehicle speed every half a second or so. It varies vehicle to vehicle. Braking input, steering input, whether seatbelts are worn, all that kind of stuff. And so you can now actually plug into the vehicle port and download that data. And this is actually proving very useful in a number of research areas. So that's a picture actually of Sam Dakey, a PhD student at CASR, who's looking at vehicle speed and crashes. Now, we've done some pretty instrumental work at CASR in the area of speed and road crash risk that has resulted in speed limits reducing all around Australia. But Sam is now looking at doing a study which is linking speed limit to travel speed to impact speed to the change in velocity at the time of the crash to injury severity. And you can do that using large data sets based on EDR. And also you can look at what was occurring in the vehicle just prior to the crash. What was the driver doing? Where are the issues that are occurring that are leading to the crash, and how might vehicle technology intervene actively to plug those gaps in human response to prevent future crashes of that sort? So EDR is another technologically driven form of new data that can be used to assist with road safety research. Another gap is education. Now, in Australia, we need a lot of people to be involved in the pursuit of the safe system, in pursuit of improving road safety. And many of the people in these roles don't necessarily have a background in road safety. There's a lot of gaps in their knowledge. And we really need to improve the education of road safety professionals if we're going to improve our road safety outcomes. Now, interestingly, post-COVID, we're going to be going into a recession, and a lot of people are going to be looking to upskill many of whom will be seeking new educational opportunities. Many of these could be met by universities. So this is a good opportunity to try and get road safety knowledge introduced more into the education curricula of learning institutions, so that the future professionals who will be guiding the road safety response in Australia have a better foundation of knowledge. One way of doing this is something we've developed at CASR in partnership with the Victorian Government and TAC, which is the Safe System for Universities modules. So this is a series of modules that can be used as a standalone course, but can also be plugged into existing engineering courses. And these modules introduce, the notion of safety within engineering in a general sense and the ethics of doing that, but also then takes people from that basis through to road safety principles and safe road infrastructure, and both from a sort of planning sense, but also a very pragmatic kind of sense. When do you weigh up the different options that you could consider in a given scenario? So it has the basic principles that people will need, but also the really practical application of them. So I think post-COVID, we are going to have an opportunity to introduce this to more people and improve the road safety knowledge of our professionals going forward. So yeah, I'll finish up there, and there's a photo of our team, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matt. Very pleased now to welcome Professor Jude Charlton, the head of the Monash University Excellent Research Centre.
Thank you, Martin, and good afternoon all. Well, COVID has certainly thrown a curveball at 2020, hasn't it? And without diminishing the serious negative impacts of the pandemic, I thought in today's presentation, I'd like to share some, or to look at things through a slightly different lens, and to share some positive lessons that I've learned from the COVID experience. So if you cast your thoughts back to Australia in early March 2020, with the benefit of knowing the experience of China and Italy, Australia's national response was decisive. And I think the view at the time was that the response required urgency of decisions and of actions. There was also a high value that was placed on science, and the chief medical officers were providing crucial advice to government. There was also a swift calling together of federal and state leaders, together with experts, into a collective think tank that we called the National Cabinet. In early March, Australia had recorded 14 deaths, and within weeks of this, a support package of $130 billion, that's billion with a B, was announced to rescue business and employees from financial crisis. And since our focus today is on research, the government also announced it was directing $66 million to fund research on COVID for vaccines. And all of this was met with wide community approval. So in reflecting on these early responses to the pandemic, which were rapid, evidence-driven, collaborative, and with broad community support, we should ask, how can we channel the same urgency that we've seen in the COVID response for road safety research? If we turn now to road safety, injury, including road trauma, was once very aptly described as the slow burn pandemic of the modern age. And I thank Rod McClure for this insight. I think what he meant, at least in part by this, was to draw attention to an emergency response. The consequences of our underwhelming approach are many. Unmet targets, and 1,170 lives were lost on Australian roads in 2019, and many more now live with lifelong disability. It's interesting to contrast research funding for road safety with other health problems of national and global significance and ask, does the investment match the burden of injury? In this month's Lancet, there's a commentary on health spending for the SDG 3. And the author makes a case to shift away from siloed funding for specific diseases and urges governments to allocate spending across a broad set of interventions addressing the most common health needs of the population. Road trauma spending also needs to be part of this debate. We already have a sense that the pool of research dollars is going to shrink, and the research workforce at universities is also under some threat. We can sense that there's a new set of social priorities emerging that will impact health, education, and the economy. Cities are changing. People are moving to regional centres where there's more affordable housing and they can still work from home. And we're changing the way that we move about our cities, in public transport, in our private cars, bicycles and commercial vehicles. But what is not yet clear is how road user behaviour might shift as we return to a new COVID normal. So monitoring these trends will be critically important in the months ahead and beyond. Early in 2020, Monash was tasked by the Victorian government with tracking injury trends through the pandemic. The injury surveillance team at MUARC provided these early trends in hospital emergency department presentations for different injury categories. Transport injuries for the month of May for most modes of transport are down, but this was with the exception of cyclists, where a substantial increase is observed compared with the comparable period in 2019. The report also tracked other injury trends. Not surprisingly, home injuries of various kinds were up, sports injuries were down. The TAC, their up-to-date monitoring of lives lost on roads year to date, mirrors these same hospital injury trends with overall reductions of around 18%. And yet cyclist fatalities were up by just over 20%. So here are my thoughts. Sorry, I'll just now look at the European trends, and these are from the European Transport Safety Council. And these showed a massive 36% decline in fatalities in the month of April compared with equivalent 3-year previous period. But the percentage of serious injuries was actually increased. And there's some really interesting light shed on this from the speed camera data, which showed excessive speeding was up. There were similar trends evident in most, but not all countries. For example, in the Netherlands, fatalities actually increased by 13%, despite a 75% decline in traffic volume. The government urged people to cycle, and they did. And with this came an increase in bicycle crashes, attributed to speeding, greater speed differentials, inexperienced riders, and insufficient space on bicycle paths to cope with the increased volume of riders. So here are my thoughts on lessons learned from COVID experience to date. Firstly, COVID has underscored the fundamental value of research and critical importance of high quality data for making evidence-based decisions. COVID has also highlighted the interconnections in our social fabric and the links that exist, although rarely acknowledged, between the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The pandemic has impacted the health of nations, but it has had a flow-on effect to safety and employment, poverty, mobility, and the environment. Road safety research might well benefit from being more embedded in the broader social context. A recent editorial in The Lancet commented that COVID-19 has shown that many of the tools that are required to fight a pandemic are also those required to fight non-communicable diseases such as road trauma. And these are quality surveillance, a strong civil society, robust public health, clear communications, and equitable access to universal healthcare systems. These are all the tools that are key to road safety, and perhaps COVID offers an opportunity to reset our expectations and priorities for road safety and road safety research. So what are the emerging priorities for research that COVID has prompted? Without question, research should be seen as an investment. in the evidence base for sound strategy and interventions. We're going to need to continue to monitor the impact of the pandemic on safety and in parallel, monitor the broader social impacts. Now, 3 international groups have already published on these emerging trends with some interesting findings that I've summarised here for exposure and modal shift, for traffic mix and speed choices, and for risky driving and mobile phone use. Lastly, the response to the pandemic offers us some pause to reflect on our approach and the quality of our tools to advance road safety research. In this new decade of action, our research focus should be firmly fixed, but with renewed urgency to achieve 50 by 30. It's going to take a coordination of effort of researchers in the public and private sector. Internationally, we've seen how a massive capacity for scaling up effort can be achieved through various joint initiatives, such as the US Department of Transport's University Transportation Centres, and in Europe, the Horizon 2020 scheme, all funded around key themes. Quality data is paramount, and we have all acknowledged for some time the need for a national data hub with relevant linked data. And finally, a third ingredient will be our research workforce, supporting and expanding our graduate research degree programs, because it is this next generation of road safety researchers that we're all going to look to achieve zero. So thank you. Look forward to some more discussion later on.
Great, thanks very much, Jude. That was outstanding. I'm sure everybody is really appreciating these contributions so far. The next person up, we've got a few more questions come in. Actually, Jude, you answered one of the questions, which just gave that sort of overall picture of sort of what's been happening in relation to injury and fatality, and that's one of the so important things which we need to get our head around. So the next person up is Associate Professor Soufiane Boufous from the Transport and Road Safety Research Centre at the University of New South Wales.
I also want to take a more sort of positive, although there aren't that many positives out of this pandemic, but I want to look at it from the point of view of what opportunity it will give us to support active transport and improve the safety of vulnerable road users. I mean, some of these statistics have been highlighted in the previous presentation. I just want to show them again. And I'm looking at recent fatality data. So for the period April to July, pretty much during the lockdown period across Australia in 2020, and then comparing it to the same period over the previous 5 years. And as you can see, the overall toll was reduced by 30%. It was much reduced for some road users, but unfortunately for cyclists, there was an increase of 70%. We don't have that much detail about the nature of these deaths and what caused them at the moment, but I'll be interested actually in looking at it as soon as I can. We know though that most of cyclist fatalities or deaths are actually related to interactions or involving motor vehicles, unlike injury where there is 50-50. So most of them would be due to a crash with another vehicle, but we need to know more. We need to know more about the nature of the crashes, where they happen, what are the risk factors, and so on, because they might be different during this period to previous periods. As Judith said, there is some evidence that while there are less motor vehicles on the street, they're more likely, people are more likely to speed and so on. So there may be other interesting causes for that period. So, but one way to explain the increase in deaths, obviously, is that as in many countries around the world, there has been an explosion in Australians taking up bike, which is fantastic to see. I'm a cyclist myself, so I'm very much heartened by that. But that also resulted, obviously, in the increase in that. So we don't have national data on the actual uptake of cycling during this period, during the pandemic, but there has been some, some data from here and there. For example, Bicycle Network, sort of a peak body cycling advocacy group, did some sort of counts on key bike path nationally in all states, and they saw an increase of 270%. We saw an increase. There have been, in Brisbane, for example, some of the famous bikeways in Brisbane have seen an increase of 50%. Same thing in Sydney. As you know, Sydney probably compared to Melbourne or compared to Brisbane, it's probably the one that is more problematic for cycling, but we've also seen an increase of between 25 and 50% in the city. But even in the outer suburbs like Parramatta, we have actually seen also an increase of same amount of increase. These increases, unfortunately, were not have resulted in reduced safety for cyclists, as we've seen with the data that I've shown. And it's mainly because the infrastructure, Australia's infrastructure, has proved inadequate to handle this sort of increase in physical activity requirement during this crisis. So it had an impact on safety of cyclists in terms of crashes, but it has not also allowed for the level of social distancing that was required during this period. So I just want to talk about sort of the reaction of the rest of the world, and then I will talk about the reaction here in Australia. But around the world, there's also been an increase in cycling, as I said, but the response to it was a bit different than here. Maybe it was more forceful, and there was definitely more action across Europe, but also in South America and United States and so on. So cities around the world have acted quickly to this increase in walking and cycling. I'm talking about cycling specifically here, but most of those, what I call tactical urbanism that was introduced as a result of pandemic, was to encourage both walking and cycling. So what tactical urbanism involves is basically interim improvement to public space. So we're talking about things like expanding shared footpath, narrowing roads, closing lanes, and then rolling out temporary cycleways, as shown in the picture below. So what we're talking about are not only in cities like Berlin, Paris, and London that have started encouraging cycling for more than a decade now, but also in cities like Mexico and Bogota that are not really known as with a huge cycling culture, but they have rolled out hundreds of miles of cycling infrastructure, that encourages walking. There were also, apart from these strategies, there were also legislative and regulatory changes that supported this process. And I'm talking about, for example, like in New Zealand, where they've introduced a centralized permission slip, like a system that makes it easier for council to build up this infrastructure, or to put up those the cycling lanes and so on. So those were incredibly important steps to actually streamline this process and to make it easier for councils to act rapidly. So those measures were put in place, as I said before, because of physical distance regulation, but also to promote cycling. And everybody talks about how it is important during the pandemic to maintain our mental and physical health. And cycling, walking, as everybody now, I'm not going to talk here about the benefit. It's one of the best ways to get where you are, but also to get exercise and so on, but also to improve the safety of cycling. As I said, here in Australia, unfortunately, we sort of got caught up because we didn't have the infrastructure for that massive increase in that we've seen in cyclists. So the support in Australia was a bit lagging. There was, I have to say that there were, across Australia, limited tactical urbanism activities, but there were no supportive legislative and regulatory changes. So in most cases, councils here didn't have the authority to take the road space without approval of state authority. And of course, that takes time, lots of red tape that basically limit what we actually can do compared to other countries. Lately, there is more recognition by states that they need to hand a bit more power to local government. I know that there are discussions here in New South Wales so they can have more control about improving cycling and walking infrastructure in their neighborhood. And there is also a steady increase in the planning of building new, what most people talk about as pop-up cycleways, but the coverage is still limited compared to other countries. I mean, I know Paris between March and probably June, they've built up something like 650 Ks of cycling infrastructure, while in New South Wales, we're talking about 40 Ks between March and the end of this year. So yeah, just the effort is not, I mean, there is definitely, we have to recognize that there has been some efforts, but we need to do more. Okay, so it's all about, from my point of view anyway, it's all about seizing the moments of COVID and trying to make, I suppose, our cities and our roads places where people can cycle, can walk safely, with all the benefits that we can actually get out of that. So where possible, we need to transform those temporary cycling infrastructures into permanent facilities. We need to construct more separate bike lanes and connect them to existing bike networks, because that's some of the complaints that people always talk about when they cycle or when they walk, that there is no connection between the infrastructures. While they're there, they're not well connected, so they don't actually serve the purpose very well. We need to enact legislative changes, like I said before, to empower local councils in this process. And all states, I know New South Wales does, and I know Western Australia does, I know Victoria does also have these plans to improve cycling infrastructure, but I think we need to fast track these plans because of the impact of the pandemic, because of the reliance on people are less likely now to take up public transport because of the pandemic, and we need to encourage them to keep those people who started cycling during this time to keep cycling into the future. So we need to incentivize cycling, to give incentives to cyclists, particularly in terms of commuting. There are programs in the UK and in Ireland which provide tax breaks, provide a bit cash incentives to people to purchase a bike, but also to cycle. I know lots of companies in France provide free lunch for people who cycle to work. So these things we need to sort of think about. So legislation that supports cycling and protect cyclists, talking about, for example, speeding related legislation, but also legislation that protect in terms of insurance cyclists and so on. We also need to think more about education to improve attitudes towards cycling. And we have done a survey, and I mean, it's in the literature out there. One of the things that most people say, they will start cycling, or they will cycle more if the attitudes towards cycling in the communities are more positive. That is, we need to promote cycling as a legitimate means of transport. There's lots of views in the community, as you know, those views basically that roads are just made for cars. Maybe they are traditionally, but these attitudes in the community need really to change for us to sort of move on and make this improvement in active transport as part a greener, a safer, a healthier sort of a recovery from the pandemic.
Associate Professor Paul Roberts from the West Australian Centre for Road Safety Research. Please share, do your slideshow.
So just a quick outline. I was just going to say something about some statistics from Western Australia that are relevant to the COVID period. And then how those statistics kind of feed into, I think, providing us with some important reminders about the human factors aspects of road safety. Then I was going to say something very briefly about some more general human factors issues that I think are on the horizon and will be critical going forward for road safety. And then something more generally about the future of human factors road safety research. So these are just some pretty dirty statistics from Western Australia, just simple fatality rates from 2010 to 2020, showing regional and metropolitan fatalities as at, and this was the 6th of September. So the 2020 data, this year's data, incorporate that COVID period. And as you can see, there seems to be a bit of a drop, and that's consistent with what other people have said, but it doesn't seem to be as great as you might have expected, given the fact that, and I'll just move to the next slide, and you can see in that picture, that's the West Australian freeway system near the centre of Perth at the end of the Easter holidays. And I know it's probably not that easy to see, but there was almost nobody on the road for quite a few weeks in Perth. So I think what's interesting here, and as Soufiane has pointed out, and I think Jude also highlighted this as well, even when there have been reductions in fatality rates in different jurisdictions, these have often been balanced out, or there has been an increase in vulnerable road user fatality rates. But even then, and I unfortunately haven't had the opportunity to try to do this, I really suspect that there probably, if you looked at fatality rates per VKT, that there probably has been an increase. And that would be consistent with something else that Jude said, I think, that we've generally seen an increase in speeding during this period. And I think, for me, the important thing here is it's not that this is something new, but it's just a really important reminder that people are active road users and they are reactive and to changes in the road environment. So there's less vehicles on the road, there's more opportunity to speed. And we need to keep that in mind. Sometimes we think that if we get more people off the road, that in fact we're going to get a lower fatality rate, less KSIs. But in fact, this might not actually be the case. And I think it just is an important reminder that we need to think about how people respond to the road environment. This is there are positives and negatives to this because it means that we might have the opportunity to leverage that fact about human behaviour to actually change people's behaviour on the road. Why did we get that increase in speeding? It could be a risk compensation, task difficulty kind of homeostasis explanation. People felt that there were less cars on the road, less workload, mental workload to be driving around. Therefore, they can balance that by increasing their speed on the road. May have felt less risky with less vehicles on the road, even though that's probably not necessarily the case, particularly in some areas. And it also makes us think about whether there are other psychosocial factors that might be important in the way that people choose their speeds. I'm not going to go into those things. I'm really just talking about this at a very high level, and really just the idea that I think this COVID natural experiment has brought to the fore some of these things that sometimes fade into the background a bit in road safety. They're always there, but it's really just throwing them into the spotlight. And I think that's quite useful. I guess the other thing that really struck me in the COVID period, and which may have interesting implications for road safety, is that we're reminded again that there are huge individual differences in the way that people respond to the environment challenges, social changes, and one of those is a well-known personality factor, conscientiousness, and we've just seen that some people don't care about necessarily doing what they have been requested to do in the same way that other people do. And I think that's something that, again, we probably forget a bit in road safety. It may be something that is worth looking at again, thinking about how, in fact, we might modify that aspect that affects people's behaviour on the road. And also risk tolerance and risk comprehension. It's very, very clear, I think. Again, an important reminder. In the COVID period, we've seen people really don't get it. And I think that's also true about road safety quite often. People really don't get it. The encouraging thing about all of this is that we actually already have quite a lot of research that tells us about those things. But what we don't have is a lot of research that tells us about those things from a road safety countermeasure perspective. And I think there's an enormous opportunity to look at those factors and try to understand how we might impact them in a way that actually counts as a road safety countermeasure. And I think going forward, hopefully we'll see much more of that. More generally, I think on the horizon, and I'm now not sort of being motivated particularly by the COVID issues, I think that it's very, very clear that human factors has a role to play in informing us and trying to deal with the unintended consequences of advanced driver assistance systems and other technology. Some of the other speakers have talked about this a little bit, but very clearly the massive increase in automation, which can rely on over-reliance issues and potentially negative transfer as well. I mean, there's already research starting to come out which shows that, for example, people become reliant on things like even simple technology like reversing cameras. People get into a vehicle that doesn't have a reversing camera when they've been driving a vehicle with a reversing camera and start backing, expecting to have some radar assistance and be able to look at the dashboard and see what's behind them when in fact that's not possible. So that kind of, in this transition to the kind of high-tech vehicles which we're starting to become used to, there's a huge role for human factors in trying to smooth that the passage of those technologies when we've got the mix of different technologies in the system, which in Australia is likely to be for quite some time. I guess the other thing that jumps out at me when I thought about this is the ergonomics of modern vehicles. While modern vehicles have light years ahead of older vehicles in terms of the technology and the safety, potential safety benefits of those technologies, to my mind, the ergonomics haven't necessarily got better. And in some cases, I believe they've actually gone backwards. We have human-machine interfaces. We have dashes in cars which are so complicated that, and I'm sure you know this, they're from personal experience, there are people that just don't understand their cars. They don't know what all the things do in their cars, what all the buttons do. They spend a lot of time looking at what they have to press in whilst they're driving along the road, which certainly is not a helpful feature and potentially is a safety risk. The other thing, which is, and again, this is a very specific thing, but I think it's an example of that is really highlights this issue that occurs in a much more widespread fashion, and that is just visibility. Modern vehicles have very often blind spots that older vehicles just didn't have. Now, some of that is for reasons that are to some extent unavoidable. They're to do with the increase in A-pillar strength and size, which is a good thing because it's increased the crash performance of modern vehicles. But there are other aspects like the position and size of wing mirrors and things, which just seem to have been not thought through it at all. And one wonders whether the emergence of technologies like blind spot monitoring and such like has led vehicle designers to just kind of give up on these things because they think that there's a technological solution. But of course, not all vehicles have those things. These systems fail. So again, I think that going forwards, there is a role for human factors in good vehicle design. And I think we've lost some of that. Just a very concrete example. In our family, we have two vehicles. One is a brand new vehicle. One is a 15-year-old vehicle by the same manufacturer. The 15-year-old vehicle has better ergonomics, better visibility, and better HMI. This is not a good thing. And I think that, yes, we definitely need to push harder in that area.
Thanks.
The other thing I wanted to highlight.
Just to wrap up now.
Yeah.
From here.
All right, I'll quickly go on to the last slide. I think the implications of all this are really that going forwards in road safety, what we really need to be focusing on is human-centered design. I think we've when we design roads and we think about putting in countermeasures, we think about severity reduction, but we don't always necessarily think about it from the perspective of the human users of the road. And I think that, and you can see some really concrete examples there. I think that coming at this from a human-centered design perspective, where we not only design roads which reduce the crash energy, but we design roads that people can actually comprehend, and which have speed limits which are credible, amongst other things, is really one of the key roles for human factors research in road safety going forwards. Thank you. Sorry, Martin, to go over time.
Great, thanks, Paul. That was finished, and a strong compliment to everybody else's contributions. Interesting review and sweep over a whole range of issues that are going to be really vital for us over the next decade. It's a big decade, and you and your institutions are going to be playing a really important role. And I think everybody greatly appreciated the opportunity to hear some of your thoughts for now. So unless there's something that anybody else would like to say for the moment, then I will say thank you very much. Thank you to all our attendees, and I hope you have a very good rest of your day.